A 4-year-old is sitting alone at a table. In front of them is a single marshmallow. A researcher has just told them, if you can wait until I come back, you'll get a second one. Then the researcher leaves the room. The camera keeps rolling, and what happens next is some of the most endearing footage in the history of psychology. Some kids eat it instantly. Some smell it, lick it, poke it. Some turn away and cover their eyes. One kid carefully peels the top off, eats the inside, and puts the shell back so it still looks whole. You've probably seen these clips. They've been shared millions of times. They're adorable. But the marshmallow test wasn't about cute videos. It became one of the most influential studies in modern psychology because of what came later. The researchers tracked those same kids down as teenagers and then as adults. And the children who waited, the story goes, had higher test scores, better health, better relationships, and more successful careers than the ones who didn't. One marshmallow, at age 4, supposedly predicted your future. This became one of the biggest ideas in behavioral science. It shaped parenting advice, education policy, even corporate hiring philosophy. The message was seductive. Self-control is the key to success. If you can delay gratification, you can do anything. There's just one problem. That story turned out to be a lot more complicated than anyone thought, and the real version is far more interesting than the myth. The experiment was designed by Walter Mischel, a psychologist at Stanford, starting in the late 1960s. The children were preschoolers at the Bing Nursery School, a lab school right on Stanford's campus. The setup was simple. A child sits at a table. A treat is placed in front of them. A marshmallow, a cookie, or a pretzel, depending on what the child preferred. The researcher explains, you can eat this one now, or if you wait until I come back, you can have 2. Then they leave. The waiting period was up to 15 minutes. For a 4-year-old, that might as well be a lifetime. What fascinated Mischel wasn't just whether children could wait, it was how they waited. The ones who succeeded had strategies, and nobody taught them. Some turned their chair around so they couldn't see the marshmallow. Some sang songs to themselves. Some invented imaginary games. One child pretended the marshmallow was a cloud and just stared at it dreamily. The children who gave in tended to do the opposite. They stared at it. They touched it. They engaged directly with the temptation. And eventually, the temptation won. Mischel's initial insight was about strategy, not willpower. The kids who waited weren't stronger. They were smarter about managing their own attention. They turned a test of will into a test of distraction. But then came the follow-up studies, and that's where the story took on a life of its own. Mischel and his colleagues tracked the children over the years. In the late 80s and 90s, they published papers showing that the kids who had waited longer at age 4 scored significantly higher on their SATs as teenagers. They were rated as more socially competent. They handled stress better. They were less likely to have behavioral problems. The media loved it. The narrative was irresistible. A single moment at age 4 could predict your entire life. Willpower was destiny. And if you could just teach children to delay gratification, you could set them up for everything. Books were written. TED Talks were given. Schools started building self-control training into their programs. The marshmallow test became one of those rare studies that crossed over into popular culture and stayed there. And for about 40 years, nobody seriously questioned it. Then, in 2013, a team at the University of Rochester did something clever. They ran a version of the marshmallow test, but added a twist before the waiting began. The children were split into 2 groups. In the first group, an adult made a promise and kept it. They said they'd bring better art supplies, and they did. In the second group, the adult made the same promise but didn't follow through. Then both groups were given the marshmallow test. The results were dramatic. Children in the reliable group waited an average of 12 minutes. Children in the unreliable group waited an average of 3. Same kids, same marshmallows, same room. The only difference was whether an adult had recently kept their word. The children who ate the marshmallow early weren't impulsive. They were rational. They had just learned that promises in this room don't mean anything. Eating it now wasn't a failure of self-control. It was a smart decision based on the information they had. And that opened a door that had been closed for decades. In 2018, Tyler Watts, Greg Duncan, and Hao-Nan Kwan published a major replication. They ran the marshmallow test on over 900 children, 10 times larger than Mischel's original sample. And crucially, their group was diverse. Mischel's original children were almost entirely from the Stanford campus community, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly affluent, overwhelmingly from educated families. The 2018 study included children from a wide range of backgrounds. What they found essentially rewrote the marshmallow story. Yes, the children who waited did somewhat better later in life. But when the researchers controlled for socioeconomic factors, household income, parental education, home environment, the marshmallow effect mostly disappeared. It wasn't the waiting that predicted success. It was the background the children came from. Children from wealthier, more stable homes were more likely to wait, not because they had superior willpower, but because their lives had taught them that waiting pays off. Promises get kept. The second marshmallow actually shows up. Their world was predictable. Children from less stable homes were more likely to eat it immediately. Not because they were weak, but because their experience had taught them the opposite. Things disappear. Adults don't always come back. If something is in front of you, take it now, because it might not be there later. Both responses were perfectly logical. They were just adapted to different realities. The marshmallow test wasn't measuring willpower, it was measuring trust. And that reframing changes more than one experiment. Think about how we talk about financial decisions. When someone living paycheck to paycheck spends money on something immediate instead of saving it, the common reaction is they need more discipline, more self-control. If they could just delay gratification, they'd be fine. But what if that's backwards? Research in behavioral economics has shown that people in financial scarcity aren't making irrational choices. They're making rational choices for an unpredictable environment. When you don't know if your car will break down tomorrow, or if your hours will get cut next week, or if that savings account will be wiped out by an emergency, the math changes. Saving for later makes sense when later is reliable. When later is uncertain, spending now is the safer bet. It's the same calculation those 4-year-olds were making. The marshmallow is here. The second one is a promise. And in my experience, promises don't always come through. This extends to health decisions too. Public health campaigns often frame unhealthy behavior as a self-control problem. Eat better, exercise more, think about your future self. But for someone working 2 jobs with no time to cook, living in a neighborhood with no grocery store, dealing with daily stress that never lets up, the future is abstract. The relief of a meal that tastes good right now is concrete. It's not that they can't think long-term. It's that their environment doesn't reward long-term thinking. Telling them to wait for the second marshmallow doesn't work when the second marshmallow has never shown up before. Even in education, the original marshmallow narrative had real consequences. Self-control programs were built into schools. Children were taught techniques to resist temptation, manage impulses, delay rewards. Which sounds reasonable until you realize that the problem was never the children. The children were responding perfectly to their circumstances. The problem was the circumstances. So here's the thing that I think makes the marshmallow story worth telling properly. The original version, the one that went viral, the one that everyone knows, carries an implicit message. It says, success is about individual willpower. If you can sit in that chair and resist, you'll be fine. And if you can't, well, that tells us something about you. It's a comforting story if you're someone who waited. It confirms that your success was earned, deserved, a product of your character. But the replications tell a different story. They say the ability to wait isn't something you're born with or something you simply choose. It's something your environment builds for you. A child who grows up in a home where promises are kept, where the fridge is always stocked, where adults come back when they say they will, that child learns to wait. Not because they're better, because they've been given a reason to. And a child who grows up in chaos, scarcity, and broken promises learns the opposite. Not because they're worse, because their strategy is adapted to a different world. In the first episode, we saw that our attention filters out more than we realize. In the second, we saw that our obedience runs deeper than we think. And now we're seeing something about willpower. It's not purely internal. It's a response to the world around us. Change the room, and you change the behavior. Walter Mischel himself actually came to a similar conclusion later in his career. In interviews, he was careful to say that the Marshmallow test was never meant to be a destiny test. It was meant to study the mechanics of self-regulation. But the popular story ran away from the science, and the nuance got lost. The real lesson of the Marshmallow test isn't learn to resist temptation. It's, if you want people to wait for the second marshmallow, build a world where the second marshmallow actually comes. The marshmallow experiment is one of those studies that's easy to love and hard to let go of. The idea that one small moment of discipline can shape your entire life is powerful. It's clean, it's simple, and it puts the responsibility exactly where we want it, on the individual. But science doesn't always give us clean stories. Sometimes it gives us complicated ones. And the complicated version of the marshmallow test, the one about trust, environment, and the invisible advantages we don't always see, is more honest, and honestly, more useful. That's 3 experiments in. This is the third of 20 episodes exploring the research that changed how we understand the human mind. Subscribe and hit notifications so you're here for the next one. And speaking of the next one, in 1897, a Russian physiologist noticed something strange about his dogs. Every time his assistant walked into the lab, before any food was even in the room, the dogs started drooling. It wasn't hunger, it was anticipation. Somehow, the dogs had learned to connect the sound of footsteps with the arrival of food. Their bodies were reacting to something that hadn't happened yet. That observation led to one of the most important discoveries in all of psychology. And if you've ever felt your heart rate spike at a notification sound, or reached for your phone the second you heard a buzz, congratulations, you're the dog. That's next time on Psycle. I'll see you there.